Howdy folks, I'm Tyler Henderson. Thanks for joining us here for East Texas in Focus. Let's get started. Tonight, we are focusing on tax season scams, discussing how to spot them, fighting back if you become a victim, and making sure you're not left paying for somebody else's crimes. Filing carefully and correctly the first time, that can also save you thousands of dollars. The IRS says criminal level tax scams are happening now more than ever and target absolutely anybody they can, quote, get their hooks into. This can go from anonymous callers on your phone trying to steal your personal information to tax preparers who are looking to make money for themselves and don't have your best interests in mind. That's why recently I had the opportunity to sit down for an extensive and very insightful interview with Christopher Altemus, special agent in charge for the IRS Criminal Investigation Dallas Field Office. For the next half hour, we're going to bring you parts of that conversation highlighting the dangers tax season can bring. We're going to begin with the red flags, though, and here are some of the common indicators people you need to pay attention to.
It's a time of year that the IRS is very busy. As you can imagine, people are excited. They have some mixed emotions. As you mentioned, some folks may be a little bit worried, a little bit concerned about what their tax debt and what they may owe. Unfortunately, this also brings out a lot of fraudsters and criminals as well. They look to prey on individuals that may have some fear of the IRS, may not be 100% aware on what the regulations are and the policies are. And they may also be chasing a large refund in the dollar, right? And so there's things you could be looking for. There's some red flags that we have identified and want to hopefully share today with your viewers on what to look for and how to protect themselves.
Sure. And walk me through some of those red flags. We'll start kind of from the beginning here because this is about the time that people start, filling out them W-2s on Turbo, what have you, TurboTax going through the IRS in general. But what are some of those red flags that people really need to keep their eyes out for?
Sure. So the first thing that I tell everybody as a number one tip of mine is no matter who you have, prepare your return. It could be a professional CPA, a larger firm, a smaller firm if you're doing it online. It could be somebody you met at church that knows accounting and do returns. My number one tip is always make sure you review that return with the preparer. And if there's things on that return that you may not understand and may seem a little bit off from the figures and information you provided, ask questions. In many regards, you are paying them. Make sure that you're the client, you get what you deserve. Things we sometimes see are individuals who will prepare your return, but they won't sign it. So that should be a red flag, right? If you're going to them, you're paying them money to prepare a tax return, and they're refusing to sign it, that should be a red flag. It should be a little bit suspicious there and something that you should be certainly asking questions about and not sign. Never sign a blank tax return. There's sometimes they want you to sign up front before you're actually seeing what's on it. Those numbers and figures are extremely important to make sure that accuracy of the return is filed with the IRS properly. So that's another red flag that we see as well.
All right. And so now with these scammers, I know that's what you always hear it, and you see the signs. You mentioned that you see signs around town, things like that. Whenever this time of year rolls around, how are they really trying to target people? What avenues are they taking? What does that look like on their end of things?
So a lot of times nowadays, it's everything from social media. As you mentioned, you could drive around certain towns and neighborhoods and see yard signs out, word of mouth. A lot of it's a volume business. So they're trying to garner and glean as many clients as they possibly can to file as many tax returns with us to generate that profit. And another red flag to look for is if it's tied to a certain percentage of your refund versus having a set flat fee. So you should ask questions about how much it's going to cost before you sit down with somebody and start working through that tax return. And if it's geared to a percentage based off your refund amount, obviously they have an incentive to increase that refund, a lot of times fraudulently, to then increase their proceeds. And you ultimately feel good as a taxpayer. You think you're getting this large refund and money coming in. You probably already have some ideas on how to spend it. The unfortunate thing is, in the Criminal Investigation Division of IRS, we look at those individuals that are violating the law at a criminal level, right? And so that requires us to do a lot of police work and go out there and interview clients and customers and look at these subjects to see, are they doing things exactly or not. That typically is a multi-year process. And so it's not just a matter of you owing back refund money to the IRS that you received illegitimately. There's interest. Sometimes there's penalties applied to that. And if that's a multi-year event for you, that could be a lot of money. That could be thousands of dollars now you're owing back to the IRS. And even if we prosecute that return preparer criminally and they go to jail for this crime, you're still ultimately responsible for that money to the IRS because it's your tax return, right? It's your account that you received that money.
And that's kind of the unfortunate reality of the whole situation. And that's never the good news, but the news in general. And so whenever they're coming at you, they kind of come at you at a couple different avenues. They can come at you through that way. They can get you through a phone call. They can find you online. What are some of the more common ways that people get fooled by these scammers that you've seen, whether that's online, things like that?
So unfortunately, we still are seeing a lot of the cold calls where they'll call up and they'll impersonate the IRS. A lot of times they're demanding money. So that should automatically be a red flag. No matter how the IRS interacts with you, whether it be mail, my division will go out and knock on your door and visit you at your business. We operate just like any other law enforcement. We may call you to set up an interview, but we're never going to demand money. So anytime somebody's demanding money from you and they're staying with the IRS, that should be a red flag, and you should immediately just hang up. You should not follow the path of what they're asking you to ultimately do. And they're prying on people's fear of the service, right? You don't want to owe any money. You don't certainly want to go to jail, which they're threatening. And so you're not really thinking. Stress is very high, and you're just going through a number of these actions that ultimately, if you could take a step back and take a deep breath and think it through, you wouldn't do. And unfortunately, a lot of people that do get sucked into these frauds and schemes don't always report it. They're sometimes embarrassed afterwards, especially our elderly population. They feel like they've been fooled. They don't want to come across as uneducated, and so they fail to report it, which makes it also difficult for us sometimes to track down these criminals and understand the vast scope of the problem. The other thing that we're seeing a lot more prevalent now is text messaging. So you may have seen these come across your phone. Amazon, right? Certain banks are sending these texts saying, hey, your account's been frozen, the package isn't going to be delivered unless you click on this link. Well, that immediately is then taking you to some sort of fraud site where it's going to ask you for personal information and try to glean a lot of that information from you to ultimately scam you in a different way. So same thing with the IRS. IRS is not going to text message you saying that please click on this link to unlock your account or you owe money, or in order to receive your refund you need to click on this attachment.
So the question is, what happens if you do fall victim to one of these schemes? Special Agent in Charge Altemus says the most important thing you can do is report it. Altemus tells us the best resource you have is right at your fingertips. That's irs.gov. Not only is the agency's website packed with information, at the bottom of the page you can find an option to make an appointment with the IRS, contact information for the agency's different divisions, and a way to send information directly to the Criminal Investigation Department. Take a listen.
If you're noticing something out there in the public and you see a return preparer business that may be fraudulent, or you talk to a friend or colleague and they say this place doesn't seem like to be legit, please report it and send it in to us. So the easiest thing to remember is irs.gov.
That's a good start and only part of the conversation with Special Agent in Charge. When we return with East Texas in Focus, the new tactics scammers are using and how the IRS investigates those crimes. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Tax season, it is in full swing. That's why today we're focusing on common scams that are investigated by the IRS. Already, the tax process can bring many emotions for a lot of people this time of year, from your first-time taxpayers to the seasoned vets who have done it year after year. That's because year after year, scammers change their tactics to steal tax return money from unsuspecting filers. So with this new technology, how have the scams people experience evolved? During our recent conversation with Christopher Altemus, Special Agent in Charge for the IRS Criminal Investigation Dallas office, he told us about some of the common tactics those fraudsters are using right now.
I've been with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in different roles for 22 years. However, I've been the Special Agent in Charge since August of 2021. And I will tell you, we see some ups and downs along the way in terms of volume. About a decade ago, we saw a lot of identity theft, and that was a huge increase in an area of focus for us. That subsided a little bit. That still also is a problem, unfortunately, for us. So I would say it still is a good significant amount of our time. We have active cases ongoing here out in East Texas. Unfortunately, I can't comment on those cases specifically because they're still being worked. But it is a problem still nationwide that we see. And unfortunately, it can be similar to the drug trade. Sometimes we feel like we're playing whack-a-mole. You knock down a couple of these fraudulent preparers and 2 or 3 more pop right up back in the same either building, establishment, or down the street. So it is a process that we're trying to constantly play catch up. And this is one reason why we're trying to change our approach a little bit and do more public outreach and try to educate the public on the front end to be careful, right? Be mindful of who's preparing your returns. Do your due diligence. Take it very seriously. It's the same way as you're going to go buy a car, buy a house, choose a bank. You got to take your return preparer selection the same level of seriousness.
Right. And so in 2023, 144 cases, guys arrested last year. I think the restitution was 43 million back. I mean, that's not an insignificant number there. It's a problem. And so what can you talk about the state of it here in the Lone Star State?
So it's something that we're working very diligently and very hard to combat. Again, we are in a process of increasing the level of employees with the IRS, and that includes also some of those resources going to criminal investigation. Believe it or not, despite what may be floating around out there in the public, IRS criminal investigation only has a little over 2,100 armed agents, so we are still very small. I have about 70 in the Dallas field office, but that also covers the state of Oklahoma and the state of Arkansas, North Texas, and East Texas. So it's a large area to cover. We do have those limited resources, but we try to be extremely strategic and looking at those real significant cases, those high dollar cases, those real egregious cases that require the expertise of criminal investigation. And in some cases, there's still the civil side of the IRS, and there's still audits being done and compliance efforts being done by the SPSE division to also try to combat this from a couple different angles.
Now, looking specifically here in East Texas, I know there's a couple cases you can't necessarily comment on, but what does it look like in the past out here specifically? I'm still pretty new to the area, so I'm just kind of curious as to what that problem looks like out here.
So it's similar to we've seen across the state, unfortunately, right? So there are a number of areas that we do see potential problem and risk, and so we are trying to tackle that. Again, we're trying to do some outreach stuff on the front end to identify those businesses and try to have those discussions with them. We also are trying to do this public outreach in terms of notifying the public and getting in front of news media to educate the taxpayer themselves. And then there's ultimately what our main job and bread and butter is, which is investigate and prosecute criminals who are committing these frauds.
As we just heard, the main job of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division is to put financial criminals in prison. CI special agents are the law enforcement officers of the IRS. They are responsible for conducting financial crime investigations that includes tax fraud, narcotics trafficking, money laundering, public corruption, healthcare fraud, identity theft, and others. Last year, together with attorneys and staff at the U.S. Attorney's offices throughout Texas, the IRS put these criminals in prison for an average of 58 months. It's all very important work because, as we've heard, these tax crimes are far from victimless. One thing we did learn during this conversation with Special Agent in charge is the last thing you want is one of his agents showing up at your door asking questions. It's especially daunting for fraudulent businesses and bad preparers who are looking to make anybody their victim.
A lot of it really starts with some good data analytics, and the IRS has a good system in place to look at the totality of an establishment, and we look at volume of returns, like the volume of the refunds, potentially some commonalities in items that seem to be a little bit off from the norm and what should be done, and then we go through a number of investigative steps along the way. So, after we get to the culmination of a case, we're certainly going to go out to that business and that establishment and talk to the owners, talk to the preparers themselves. We'll also be talking to a lot of clients as well to see, ultimately, has a crime been committed? And then, can we prove those elements of the crime for ultimate prosecution in tandem with the U.S. Attorney's Office. So a lot of this is obviously us working jointly with the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure that we bring these criminals to justice.
At what point, I guess, differentiate for me, at what point do y'all, when you get the numbers and stuff, at what point do you say, okay, now we've got to really get involved here? Where's that line between, okay, we'll stay out of it for now, but okay, now we really have to dive in?
So a lot of it, again, it goes back to those inaccurate, I'll say, items on a return, and looking to see that in tandem with the witnesses and what information they're ultimately being provided to that return pair. I mean, that's ultimately the crux of these crimes. Is a lot of times there's information on the returns that the clients aren't even aware of. And that's another reason why I'm trying to put that first and most important tip out there is review the tax return. You'd be surprised how many times my agents go out and knock on doors and sit down with clients of these fraudulent preparers, and it's the very first time that they're realizing that there is a Schedule C, right, attached to the return, which is for a small business. And they never had a small business. So they're certainly not having a bunch of expenses tied to that small business. Or in prior years, and there's still a little bit of this fraud, Schedule A. So you see this huge inflated medical expense deduction that you didn't have, right? Or this large number that was allegedly given to charity that you didn't do. And so it's very sometimes shocking and amazing and a little unfortunate that the very first time that a taxpayer is really truly reviewing the return, it's not with the return payer, right? It's with an IRS criminal investigation special agent, as part of a criminal enterprise and scheme. So again, you got to really review that return. You got to make sure you have somebody explain that information to you so you feel comfortable and confident that that is accurate information that's being filed with the IRS.
When you look at some of these criminal cases they're targeting, a lot of times the elderly people are prime targets there. And I know a lot of first-time people my age are starting to file their taxes for the first or second time. Where do you see those targets, those cases kind of being targeted? Younger audiences, older? Where are we looking at?
It's a combination of both. It's definitely for some that don't have the experience, for sure that's a prime group to scam and fraud, because you don't know. You don't have that year's prior history of knowing what really should be on your return. You don't have that prior refund to compare it to and say, wait a minute, last year I made a couple $1,000, now all of a sudden it's jumping to 10. This doesn't seem quite right. What changed? There's also sometimes with folks that are using somebody that's more local and they're maybe not as sophisticated financially, and so that's another area too.
I'm saying, you're not saying that they're targeting, they'll target just about everybody. They'll target your big corporations, your businesses, you target your individuals. There's really they're not really looking at one specific group specifically. Am I hearing that right?
Unfortunately not, right? It's just they're in a money-making business, and so they're going to scam whoever they can get their hooks into. And yes, large corporations are not immune. We have folks with all walks of life, so you could be a doctor, you could be a politician, a lawyer. Just because you have an advanced degree doesn't mean you're not going to be susceptible to some of these schemes. We see it every day. Unfortunately, we have employees that get caught into some of these schemes. Unbeknownst to them. And so there's a lot of trust right now in a lot of our institutions and items that seem to be legit. And I think also just the nature of the beast with our current environment where everything is instantaneous. You're waiting for that package to come. You may not want to take that extra minute or two to truly review something. It seems legit. You're going to click on it on your phone. It's kind of that TikTok syndrome right now, right, where everything happens so instantaneously and so fast, where if you just kind of took your time, took a pause, breathe, then looked at it a second time and realized, wait a minute, I don't have money at that bank. How are they texting me about a frozen account? Or I haven't even filed my taxes yet. So how is my refund being held up? Little things you can help yourself with to avoid some of these scams.
When we return, we review some of the red flags, warnings, and tips that we've heard today. And a final word from Special Agent in Charge, Christopher Altemus. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As we've heard in today's In Focus, anybody can fall victim to scammers, especially during this tax season. The methods these individuals and groups use are always evolving and get better every day. Based on the conversation with the IRS Criminal Investigations Division, here's a few things to keep in mind as you file your taxes for this year.
Filing taxes can be stressful. Even more stressful, scammers trying to access your valuable information.
In 2021, tax fraud was the #1 way people's identities were stolen.
Bailey Parker with the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs says tax season is a gold mine for fraudsters.
So they may start trying to go mailbox to mailbox, see if they can get people's W-2s from their employers. And then they will try and file taxes in people's names. That's the most common form of tax fraud.
Other ways scammers will try to get your information is posing as the IRS.
You may even see on your caller ID, it says it's coming from the Internal Revenue Service. No, it's not. If your caller ID says something like that, it's a scam. That means that somebody is spoofing the IRS's phone number, spoofing being that they're covering their real phone number with any phone number that they want.
I went directly to the source to find out how they will contact you.
It won't be a text message. It won't be an email. Most of the time, it will be a U.S. mail.
Stacey Engel, a spokesperson with the IRS, says you can keep scammers away by filing your taxes as soon as possible.
They don't necessarily you have to have your information in order to create a tax return using your social security number or tax identification number. So once you have the information to file an accurate one, we suggest you do it.
Experts also say to avoid doing your taxes on public Wi-Fi, as that can put your private information at risk.
Don't do anything private on public networks, especially your taxes. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. I know the free Wi-Fi is tempting. Just don't do it.
And before we ended our conversation with Christopher Altemus, the special agent in charge for the IRS Criminal Investigation Dallas Field Office, we asked him his final thoughts on the subject. He also told us about how you can be a part of the solution to the growing issue. Take a listen.
So I think, again, in terms of the red flags, I believe we certainly touched on that. One thing I will say is we are hiring. So those that may be interested in serving their country, that may want to put, if they have some financial expertise, to good use and have an interest in law enforcement, whether it be a special agent where you're carrying a badge and a gun, or professional staff where you're helping out with data analytics and things like that. You can go to usajobs.gov and find those announcements.
Well, coming up after the break, some final advice for our worry-free tax season. We'll be back in just a little bit. Well, as we've seen in today's program, tax scams are among the most stubborn cons out there. They reappear often, each time with a slightly different spin. Remember, the main theme is scammers posing as the IRS, trying to trick people into either paying up or sharing their personal information. The best way to avoid tax identity theft is to file your taxes as early as possible before a scammer has a chance to use your information to file a fake return. Only deal with trustworthy tax preparation services, and always check out websites carefully. And if you do become the victim, make sure the first thing you do is call the IRS. They are there to help you out. That's going to do it for this edition, folks. Next week, we're going to zero in on more issues here on East Texas in Focus. Have a good one, everybody.